The town of Willow Creek was small, the kind where everyone knew everyone's story, or at least thought they did. When people spoke about Emma Clark, they did so in whispers. "She's the broken one," they said. "No one knows what happened that night," others replied. But Emma never answered them. Because Emma hadn't spoken a single word in 3 years. Every morning, she walked the same quiet path to the small cafe near the old clock tower. The cafe was called Harper's Place. She worked there serving coffee, cleaning tables, smiling politely but never saying a word. Her smile was soft, almost shy, but her eyes carried a sadness that never faded. Some said she had once been full of life. She used to sing in the school choir, laugh loudly in the park, dream about moving to New York. But one night changed everything. No one really knew what happened, only that after that night, Emma stopped talking, stopped smiling, and moved away from her old home. Now, she lived alone in a small apartment above the cafe. Her world was quiet, not peaceful, but heavy. Every sound seemed too loud, every word from others felt like an echo from a life she had lost. Then one day, a stranger walked into her silence. His name was Daniel Brooks, a man in his late 20s with messy brown hair, an easy smile, and eyes that looked like they'd seen their own share of pain. He ordered black coffee and sat near the window, watching the rain. When Emma brought his cup, he thanked her warmly. She only nodded and left quietly. The next day, he came again. And again the day after that. He always sat in the same corner. Sometimes, he worked on his laptop. Sometimes, he read. But most days, he just talked to her. "Hey, quiet girl," he said once, smiling softly. "You always look like you have a secret." Emma blinked, unsure how to react. He laughed. "Don't worry. I'm not trying to pry. Just talking helps me think." And so, he talked. About his job, his travels, his favorite books. Emma listened, quietly cleaning tables or refilling his cup. She didn't know why, but something about his voice felt safe. It didn't demand an answer. A few weeks passed. Daniel had become part of her routine, like the smell of roasted beans or the sound of the bell over the cafe door. One rainy evening, the cafe was empty except for the two of them. Thunder rolled outside, and Emma stood by the window, watching the storm. Daniel, sitting at his usual spot, looked at her for a long time before saying quietly, "You know, people say silence is peaceful. But sometimes, it's the loudest thing in the world." Emma froze. Her hand trembled slightly. He didn't look at her, he just kept staring out the window. "I know what it's like to stop talking," he continued. "After my sister died, I didn't speak for months. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't see the point." Emma's eyes softened. She didn't expect that. For a moment, she almost wanted to write something, maybe a thank you, maybe just his name, but she didn't. Instead, she turned away, pretending to wipe a counter that was already clean. That night, when the cafe closed, Daniel stayed a bit longer, helping her put chairs up on tables. When he left, he smiled and said, "Good night, Emma." It was the first time anyone had said her name with warmth in years. But later that night, Emma sat alone in her apartment, staring at an old photograph. It showed a young man smiling, holding her close. The photo edges were torn, and a black line was drawn across his face. Her fingers shook as she traced it. A tear fell onto the picture. She whispered so faintly that even she barely heard it, "I'm sorry." Then, she closed her eyes. The memories came back in flashes. A car. A scream. Broken glass. And a voice yelling her name before everything went dark. She woke up hours later in a hospital bed. They told her he didn't make it. That it was her fault. And that was the last day she ever spoke. The next morning, Daniel returned to the cafe. He noticed the redness in her eyes but said nothing. Instead, he slid a small napkin across the counter. On it, he had written, "You don't have to speak for people to hear you." Emma stared at the words for a long moment. Then, for the first time in years, she smiled a small, broken, but real smile. But as Daniel left, something caught his eye. Outside, near the trash bin, he saw the same torn photograph Emma had been holding, the one with the man's face scratched out. He bent down and picked it up. At the back of the photo, in faded ink, were 3 words. "Forgive me, Emma." Daniel looked up toward the apartment window above the cafe. Her light was still on. He didn't know who the man in the photo was. But he knew one thing for sure: Emma Clark's silence wasn't just sadness. It was a wound still bleeding. And he wanted to know why. The next few days at Harper's place felt different. Daniel still came every morning, still sat in his usual corner, but now there was a quiet curiosity in his eyes. He couldn't stop thinking about that old photograph, the one with the man's face crossed out and those 3 haunting words, "Forgive me, Emma." He didn't mention it right away. He just kept visiting, talking to her, like always gentle, kind, never pushing too hard. Emma noticed he looked at her differently, as if he wanted to ask something but didn't know how. One morning, as she wiped the counter, Daniel said softly, "Emma, do you ever miss music?" Her hands froze. Music? That word used to mean everything to her. Slowly, she nodded. Daniel smiled. "You know, I play a little guitar. Maybe I could play something here after closing? Just soft music, for you." Emma hesitated, then gave a small shrug, a silent okay. That evening, when the cafe was empty, Daniel sat on a stool and began to play. His fingers moved gently across the strings, creating a melody that filled the quiet room. Emma stood behind the counter, frozen. It had been years since she'd heard music that close. Her eyes watered. The song he played, she knew it. It was The Only Light, a song once written by Ryan Carter, her late fiancé. Her breath caught in her chest. Daniel looked up mid-song. "You know this one?" Emma nodded slowly. He smiled softly. "It's one of my favorites. The guy who wrote it, Ryan Carter, he died young, right? Car crash, I think." Emma's hands began to shake. The mug she was holding slipped and shattered on the floor. Daniel jumped up. "Emma, are you okay?" She didn't answer. She bent down, picking up the pieces with trembling fingers, cutting her hand. Blood appeared on her palm, but she didn't stop. Daniel gently held her wrist. "Hey, stop, you're hurt." For a long moment, she stared at him, her lips parted like she wanted to speak. But no sound came. Then she pulled away and rushed into the back room. Daniel stood alone, confused and worried. Later that night, as he walked home through the rain, he couldn't stop thinking about the look in her eyes, the fear, the guilt. It wasn't just sadness. It was pain that went too deep to touch. Emma sat in her small apartment, her bleeding hand wrapped in a napkin. On the table lay an old notebook. She opened it. Inside were letters she had written to Ryan after the crash, letters no one had ever read. "You said you loved me. You promised to be careful. But you lied. You drove drunk, Ryan. You closed your eyes and didn't care what happened next. They blamed me. They said I should have stopped you. But how could I stop you when you wouldn't listen? I still hear your voice every night. I still see the lights. I still feel the crash." A tear fell onto the page. She closed the notebook and pressed it to her chest. The next day, Daniel came back. Emma didn't look at him. Her eyes were red, her face pale. He waited until the cafe was empty. Then, he spoke quietly. "I'm sorry if I upset you last night. I didn't know about Ryan." Her hands stopped moving. Slowly, she turned to him, her eyes wide. I. I found the photo, Daniel continued gently. I didn't mean to, but I did. I saw his name. Emma stared down at the counter, frozen. I read about him, Daniel said softly. He was a singer, right? A rising star. The news said it was an accident. But they also said, he stopped himself. He couldn't bring himself to repeat it, the cruel words he had read online. That Emma was the one who convinced Ryan to drive that night. That they had been fighting. That she survived and he didn't. I don't believe what people say, Daniel added quickly. But I need you to know, you don't have to keep this inside. Emma slowly reached for her notebook and wrote. Everyone blames me. Daniel read it and shook his head. Then they're wrong. She wrote again. I told him not to drive. He was angry. He said I didn't trust him. Then the crash happened. I woke up alone. Her hands trembled as she wrote, tears falling onto the page. Daniel wanted to hold her, but he stayed still, giving her space. I believe you, he said softly. You were trying to stop him. That's not your fault. For a moment, something in Emma's chest cracked open, not pain this time, but a small flicker of relief. Someone believed her. That night, Daniel stayed late, cleaning tables beside her. He hummed quietly the same song, but slower this time. Emma didn't cry. She just listened. When he left, she stood at the window, watching him walk away. For the first time in years, her silence didn't feel empty. It felt understood. But the next morning, when Daniel arrived at the cafe, there was something on his table, a small folded note. He opened it and read the words written in neat handwriting. You don't know what she really did. There was no name. No signature. Daniel looked up sharply toward the counter where Emma stood, unaware of the note. His chest tightened. He didn't believe the rumors, he couldn't. But the question now whispered inside his mind, no matter how hard he tried to ignore it. What really happened that night? The cafe felt colder the next morning. Daniel sat at his usual table, staring at the folded note that someone had left for him. You don't know what she really did. The words kept echoing in his mind, twisting his thoughts. Who wrote it? And what did they mean? He looked toward Emma. She was behind the counter, quietly preparing coffee for an old couple. Her movements were calm, but her eyes looked distant, almost afraid. Daniel's heart felt heavy. He wanted to trust her. He did trust her. But the letter, it made him question what he didn't know. When the cafe emptied, he finally spoke. Emma, can I ask you something? She looked up. He hesitated. That night, the crash. Were you and Ryan fighting? Emma froze. The cup in her hand slipped, spilling coffee across the counter. Her breathing grew fast, her eyes wide. Daniel immediately regretted it. Hey, I'm sorry. I didn't mean. But Emma stepped back, shaking her head quickly. Her lips trembled. She grabbed a cloth and began cleaning the mess, trying to hide her shaking hands. He wanted to take back the question, to pretend he'd never said it, but the damage was done. The walls she'd slowly started lowering were back up stronger than before. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat in his apartment, the note still on his desk. He searched online, old articles, interviews, police reports. And there it was. Headlines from 3 years ago. Rising music star Ryan Carter dies in tragic crash. Girlfriend survives. Locals say couple argued before accident. Daniel scrolled further. Comments. Rumors. Lies. People said Emma grabbed the wheel. Others said she dared him to drive faster. No one told the truth, they just wanted someone to blame. He closed his laptop, feeling sick. He knew the internet loved to destroy people. But something about the story didn't sit right. The report mentioned Ryan's car had a history of mechanical issues. But it ended there. No follow-up, no investigation. Just silence. Daniel whispered to himself, "That doesn't make sense." The next morning, when he walked into the cafe, Emma wasn't there. Her boss, Mrs. Harper, said softly, "She didn't show up today." That's not like her. Daniel's worry grew. He went to Emma's apartment, the one above the cafe. The door was locked, but through the small window he could see her sitting by the floor, holding her old notebook tightly. He knocked gently. She didn't move. He waited a long time before she finally opened the door, eyes red from crying. "I shouldn't have asked," he said softly. "But please, don't shut me out." Emma looked down, then slowly handed him her notebook. She turned the first page for him. Inside were words written years ago. "They said I caused it. They said I wanted him gone. But no one knows he hit me that night." Daniel's eyes widened. He looked at her in shock. She didn't look up. She wrote again. "He was drunk. I tried to stop him. He got angry. He said I made him weak. He hit me and took the keys. I ran after him. Then, the crash." Tears fell silently down her cheeks as Daniel read every word. He finally whispered, "Emma, you didn't do anything wrong." She shook her head. "People don't care. They needed someone to blame. And I was the only one left." Daniel clenched his fists. His heart hurt for her for how much she'd carried alone. Later that evening, Daniel went to the town library. He asked to see public records, anything about Ryan Carter's accident. The librarian hesitated but finally gave him access to old reports. He flipped through them: police notes, mechanical checks, autopsy records. Then one detail caught his eye. The mechanic's note said, "Brake line damage appears pre-existing. Possible tampering." Daniel's eyes widened. Tampering. Someone had messed with the car before the crash. He went to the old police station the next morning and found Officer Reynolds, the man who'd handled the case. He was retired now, sitting behind a small desk. "Officer Reynolds," Daniel said, showing him the report. "This line about the brakes. Why wasn't it investigated?" The man looked tired, nervous even. "Because the case was closed fast," he muttered. "Too fast. Someone from higher up told us to stop digging." "Who?" Daniel asked. The officer hesitated. "Ryan's manager. Big money behind that kid. He didn't want bad press. He said it was better for everyone if the story stayed simple: drunk driving, end of story." Daniel's heart pounded. "You mean Emma was blamed for nothing?" Reynolds sighed. "The girl was innocent. But once the town started talking, it was too late. No one wanted the truth." Daniel left the station in shock. Rain started falling again, heavy and cold. He walked straight to the cafe. Emma was there, cleaning quietly, eyes down. He went up to her and said firmly, "Emma, I know the truth. You didn't cause that crash." She looked up slowly, confused. He continued, "Ryan's car was tampered with. Someone cut the brakes before that night. You were never at fault." Her eyes filled with tears, but there was something else too: disbelief. Hope, maybe, buried under years of pain. Daniel reached across the counter and held her hand. "You deserve peace, Emma. You deserve to breathe again." She shook her head weakly, writing one last message on her notebook. "No one will believe us." Daniel looked at her, voice steady. "Then I'll make them." That night, as the rain hit the cafe windows, Emma sat alone, staring at her reflection in the glass. For the first time, she didn't see a broken girl. She saw someone who had survived lies, blame, and silence. but deep down, she still wondered. If the truth was hidden for so long, what else were they hiding? The next morning, the world outside looked calm, but inside Emma's heart was chaos. She sat at her small kitchen table, staring at the notebook Daniel had returned to her. The words he'd said last night still echoed in her mind. You were never at fault. For years, she had carried the weight of guilt. Now Daniel was telling her the accident wasn't just an accident. Someone had cut the brakes. Her hands trembled as she flipped open the notebook and began to write again, not for herself this time, but for him. Downstairs, Daniel was waiting in the cafe, pacing back and forth. His coffee had gone cold, untouched. He had barely slept. The truth he'd learned kept him awake all night. Ryan's manager Mark Dillard had been stealing from Ryan's career. The financial records Daniel found proved it. Ryan had discovered the missing money weeks before the crash and threatened to expose him. Daniel pieced it together. Ryan confronted Mark. Mark panicked. And that night, someone tampered with the car. It made sense. Too much sense. When Emma finally came down, Daniel met her halfway. Emma, he said softly, there's something else. He showed her the printed papers, copies of Ryan's financial records and a short article from an old music blog. The article said that just days before the crash, Ryan had told a friend he was planning to fire his manager. Emma's eyes widened. She pointed to the paper, then to herself, silently asking, he knew? Daniel nodded. Yes. Ryan found out what Mark was doing. And he planned to confront him. But Mark couldn't let that happen. Emma covered her mouth, tears forming again, but this time, they were different. They weren't tears of guilt, they were tears of anger and disbelief. All those years she had blamed herself, while the real monster walked free. Daniel placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. You deserve to know everything. And I'll help you find him. But when they tried to search, Mark Dillard seemed to have vanished. His old company was gone, his address empty. It was like he had disappeared after the crash. Still, Daniel didn't stop. He called people, sent emails, searched every public record he could find. Then one night, while scrolling through an online forum for musicians, he found a comment from a user who mentioned seeing Mark a year ago running a small recording studio under a fake name in Denver, Colorado. Daniel printed the post and showed it to Emma the next morning. She stared at the name on the paper. Her hands shook. Then she wrote on her notebook. I need to see him. Daniel's eyes filled with worry. Emma, he's dangerous. We can tell the police. But she shook her head firmly. I need to face him. I need to end this. A week later, they drove to Denver. The road stretched endlessly ahead, and the silence between them was heavy but not empty. It was the kind of silence that carried courage. As the city lights appeared, Emma looked out the window, remembering the last time she was in a car at night. Her fingers clenched around the notebook in her lap. Daniel glanced at her, saying quietly, You're not alone this time. They found the studio, a small, dim building on the edge of town. A flickering sign read Dillard Records, half the letters missing. Through the glass window, they saw him, Mark. Older, heavier, but unmistakably the same man from the old photos. Daniel took a deep breath. Are you sure you want this? Emma nodded. Her heart was pounding, but her eyes were steady. They entered. Mark looked up from his desk, confused. Can I help you? He asked, voice cautious. Daniel spoke firmly. You remember Ryan Carter? Mark froze. His face went pale. Before he could speak, Emma stepped forward. She placed the old photograph, the one Daniel had found, on his desk. Her hands were shaking, but her gaze didn't waver. Mark swallowed hard. You're her. She nodded once. Daniel stepped closer. We know what you did. The money, the breaks. You killed him, and you let her suffer for it. Mark's face twisted. You have no proof. Daniel dropped the printed records on the desk. I have enough. Mark's voice cracked. You don't understand. Ryan was going to ruin everything. I built him. I made him famous. Emma slammed her hand on the desk, tears spilling from her eyes. Her voice didn't come, but her expression said everything: pain, rage, years of silence breaking in her stare alone. Mark backed away, panicked. What do you want from me? Emma slowly took her pen and notebook, writing one line. She turned it toward him. The truth. Daniel pulled out his phone. You can tell it here, or in a courtroom. Mark looked between them, realizing he had no way out. His shoulders slumped. Fine. I'll tell them. I'll tell everyone. Daniel hit record on his phone. The confession spilled out: every stolen dollar, every lie, every crime. Emma stood there, silent but strong, as the man who had destroyed her life finally spoke the truth. That night, back in their motel, Emma sat by the window. The rain tapped softly against the glass. She opened her notebook again and wrote. For 3 years, I carried his death like a chain. Today, I finally let it go. Daniel smiled gently beside her. You did it, Emma. You faced the truth. She looked at him and wrote one last line for the night. The truth didn't break me. It made me free. But as she closed the notebook, she didn't know what was waiting back home, that her story wasn't finished yet. Because by the time they returned to Willow Creek, the whole town would know the truth. And for the first time in years, Emma Clark would have to decide if she was ready to finally speak. The sun was rising over Willow Creek when Emma and Daniel drove back into town. The sky was soft orange, quiet and peaceful, but inside the car, Emma's heart was racing. She had the truth now. She had Mark Dillard's full confession recorded on Daniel's phone. For 3 long years, the world had called her a liar, a coward, and a murderer. Now, she finally had something that would set her free. But freedom was a strange thing. After years of silence, it almost felt too heavy to carry. When they reached Harper's place, the cafe was closed, but people were already whispering outside. Someone must have shared the news online about Mark's arrest, about Ryan's case being reopened. By noon, everyone in town knew. For the first time, the whispers weren't cruel. They were shocked. Emma was innocent. She tried to stop him. My God, all this time, we blamed her. Emma watched them from across the street, her hands trembling as she held her notebook. She didn't go inside the cafe. She just stood there breathing, listening. Daniel stood beside her. You don't have to face them if you're not ready, he said softly. But she shook her head. Her eyes were calm. For the first time, she didn't look afraid. I have to, she wrote. That afternoon, a local reporter visited. She wanted to cover the story: the girl who was silent for 3 years. Emma agreed, but only if Daniel stayed beside her. They met in the small cafe that evening. The camera light blinked red. The reporter asked gently. Emma, you haven't spoken since the night of the accident. Is there anything you want to say now? Emma froze. Her throat tightened. For a moment, her body refused to move. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but now, sitting in front of everyone, she was terrified. Daniel reached out, placing a hand over hers. You don't have to, he whispered. Not unless you want to. Emma closed her eyes. The silence in the room was so deep it almost hurt. Then, she slowly opened her notebook and turned to the first page. It was the same one she had written in years ago, the page filled with pain, guilt, and the words, everyone blames me. She tore it out. Then she looked straight into the camera, her eyes clear, her lips trembling. Her voice came out small, Fragile, but real. No more, she whispered. The room went completely still. Tears filled Daniel's eyes. Mrs. Harper gasped. The reporter froze. Emma's voice shook as she continued. They called me broken. They called me weak. But I survived. And surviving, that's not weakness. Her voice grew steadier with every word. I was silent because I thought I deserved the pain. But the truth is, silence only helped the lies live longer. I don't want to live in silence anymore. A single tear rolled down her cheek. I forgive those who blamed me, she said softly. But I'll never forget what it taught me, that no one has the right to define you by your worst day. Daniel smiled through his tears. The reporter lowered her camera, speechless. Emma took a deep breath and finished quietly. My name is Emma Clark, and I'm not broken anymore. The story went viral within hours. News outlets across the country shared her words. People called her the girl who spoke again. But Emma didn't care about the fame. She cared about the letters, hundreds of them, from people who had also lost their voices to pain, guilt, or fear. They told her she gave them hope. And that was enough. Weeks passed. The cafe returned to its usual rhythm. But now, laughter filled the air again, hers included. Emma spoke little, but every word carried meaning. One day, Daniel found her sitting by the window, drawing in her notebook. He smiled. What are you writing now? She smiled softly. A new beginning. He sat beside her. For you. She shook her head. For everyone who thought they were too broken to heal. Daniel reached over and gently squeezed her hand. You know, I think your silence was never weakness, Emma. It was strength waiting for the right moment to speak. She looked out the window, the sunlight touching her face. For the first time in years, she felt warmth that wasn't just from the sun, it was from peace. Later that evening, she stood outside the cafe as the sun went down. The sky turned gold, the wind gentle. She whispered softly into the air, not to anyone in particular, but to the boy in the old photograph. Ryan, she said, her voice calm, steady, free. I forgive you. And just like that, the past no longer chained her. It became part of her, but not her prison anymore. She smiled, walking back toward the light inside Harper's place. Because Emma Clark, the girl everyone once called broken, was finally unbreakable. The end.